Every single summer, without fail, a massive cultural war erupts on the internet between the United States and the United Kingdom. It starts the exact second the temperature in London crosses 25 degrees Celsius, which is about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. In the US, 77 degrees is considered a beautiful, mild spring day. It is the kind of weather where you might wear a light sweater in the morning and sit comfortably on a patio for lunch. But in the UK, 77 degrees is treated like a national emergency. The newspapers print front-page warnings in giant red letters. The weather presenters look genuinely panicked, and the entire country collectively decides that they are on the brink of absolute survival. When I first moved to London from the US about 2 years ago, I saw these headlines and I was literally shocked. I remember looking at my weather app, seeing 78 degrees, and then looking at TikTok, only to see my fellow Americans absolutely losing their minds. People in Texas, Florida, and Arizona were pointing and laughing at the Brits. They were posting videos saying things like, how did this country once rule a massive empire across the globe if they are literally dying of heat at 80 degrees Fahrenheit? They joke about how the British Army must have lost the Revolutionary War because it got slightly humid outside. On the surface, it looks like the ultimate proof that British people are just incredibly soft when it comes to the sun. But then, my first actual British summer hit. And let me tell you, I had to eat every single word of my American skepticism. I went from laughing at the local news to lying flat on my kitchen floor in a puddle of my own sweat, wondering if I was going to survive the night. It turns out that everything Americans believe about British summer is a complete lie. There is a deeply hidden, terrifying reality behind why 25 degrees in the UK feels like 110 degrees in the Arizona desert. It is not that the British people are weak. It is that the entire country is physically engineered to turn into a giant, inescapable oven the second the sun comes out. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the first major shock on our list of summer revelations, which is the bizarre and terrifying reality of British architecture. Back in the US, we are completely spoiled by how our homes are built. Most American houses, especially in the South and Midwest, are built out of wood framing, drywall, and siding. They are designed to let air flow, and more importantly, they are built around the assumption that you will have central air conditioning. Our walls are relatively thin, our windows open fully, and if it gets hot, we just press a button on the thermostat and wait for the cool air to save us. In the UK, the housing situation is the complete opposite. British houses are ancient, beautiful, and built like literal brick fortresses. The vast majority of homes here were built decades, if not centuries ago. They are made of incredibly thick, solid brick, stone, and heavy mortar. And you have to understand the historical context of why they were built this way. For the last several hundred years, the main challenge of living in the British Isles was not staying cool. It was surviving the 9 months of grey, damp, bone-chilling cold that sweeps in from the Atlantic. Because of this, British architects had one single solitary mission: trap every single microscopic ounce of thermal heat inside the building at all costs. And let me tell you, they succeeded brilliantly. These houses are masterclasses in insulation. The thick brick walls absorb the cold air during the winter and hold on to the heat generated by the radiators. But in the summer, this exact engineering becomes an absolute nightmare. When the sun beats down on a British brick house for 12 hours, those heavy bricks act like thermal batteries. They slowly absorb the heat all day long, and then, around 9 o'clock at night when you are trying to go to sleep, the bricks start radiating that trapped heat directly back into the interior of the house. It is like living inside a giant clay pizza oven that has been preheating all afternoon. Even if you open the windows, you do not get any relief. In the US, our windows usually slide straight up and down, and they have screens to keep the bugs out, allowing you to catch a beautiful cross breeze. In the UK, the windows are completely different. Most of them are crank windows or awning windows that only push outward on a tiny metal latch, opening maybe 3 or 4 inches at most. And there are absolutely no window screens. If you open them wide, your entire house will be immediately invaded by giant spiders, flies, and moths. So you are left with 2 terrible choices: either suffocate in the dead, trapped air of your brick oven, or open the window and sleep in a room full of insects. Also, this is exactly the kind of thing I go much deeper on with the people who support this channel directly. So if you are sitting there thinking, okay, I need the fuller version of this story, join the membership below. That is where I share the deeper thoughts, the more personal side of all this, and the extra bits I cannot always fit into the main videos. It is an amazing way to connect with the community and really get the behind the scenes look at what life is like as an expat navigating these wild cultural shocks. Once you understand the architecture, the next thing you realize is that the physical physics of the air itself are completely different here. This brings us to the second massive shock, which is the silent killer of British summer, the humidity. Whenever I try to explain this to my friends back home in places like California or Colorado, they always tell me that humidity is the same everywhere, but they are completely wrong. The UK is a relatively small island surrounded by the cold waters of the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. The prevailing southwesterly winds are constantly blowing moist, wet sea air directly over the landmass. When a heatwave hits the UK, it is not a dry, crisp heat. It is an incredibly heavy, dense, tropical humidity that wraps around your body like a warm, wet blanket. Scientifically, our bodies cool down through a process called evaporative cooling. When we get hot, we sweat, the sweat evaporates into the dry air, and that physical reaction transfers the heat away from our skin. It is a beautiful system that works perfectly in places like Las Vegas or Phoenix. In those dry climates, you can walk around in 100 degrees and feel relatively dry because the air is thirsty for moisture. But in the UK, the humidity is often sitting at 80 or 90% during a heat wave. The air is already completely saturated with water. It literally cannot hold any more moisture. So when you start sweating, that sweat has nowhere to go. It cannot evaporate. Instead, it just sits on your skin, turning into a thick, sticky layer of condensation. You are not actually cooling down at all. You are just slowly stewing in your own body heat. It makes 25 degrees Celsius feel like an absolute sauna. You feel completely drained of energy, your skin feels perpetually sticky, and breathing the air feels like you are inhaling steam in a locker room. I had an American friend visit me last July, and she was laughing at the weather forecast before she arrived. She lives in Georgia where they get heavy summers, and she thought she was completely immune to anything the UK could throw at her. Within 48 hours of walking around London in 80-degree weather with no breeze, she looked at me with pure terror in her eyes and said, "Why does this feel like I am walking through hot soup?" That is the exact moment she realized that the numbers on the weather app do not mean a single thing when you are dealing with British humidity. Quick thing before we get to the worst two on this list of British summer shocks. The data on this channel shows that over 80% of you watching right now are not subscribed. That means you are showing up for the content, but the algorithm has no reason to show you the next video. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. We have so many more culture shocks and funny expat stories lined up, and I want to make sure you are always in the loop. Now, let us talk about the third absolute nightmare of the British summer, which is the public transportation infrastructure. In America, if it gets hot, we walk to our cars, turn the key, and blast the air conditioning. If we take public transit, the buses and trains are almost always air conditioned to freezing temperatures. It is just a baseline standard of modern life. But in London, commuting during a heatwave is a literal test of human endurance. The London Underground is one of the greatest engineering marvels in the world, but it was built in the Victorian era. The tunnels were dug deep into the clay earth over 150 years ago. Because the tunnels are so narrow and deep, there is physically no space to install traditional air conditioning units on most of the older lines, like the Central Line or the Northern Line. When you descend into the subway during July, you are leaving the fresh air behind and stepping directly into a subterranean cavern of trapped thermal energy. The clay surrounding the tunnels has actually spent the last century absorbing the heat generated by the train brakes and the bodies of millions of commuters. Over the decades, the ground temperature deep underground has steadily risen. During a summer heat wave, the temperature on the Central Line platforms can easily reach over 35 degrees Celsius, which is nearly 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And remember, there is zero airflow. You are standing on a crowded platform, packed shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of other sweating commuters, waiting for a train that has its windows slightly cracked open to let in more hot, dusty air from the tunnel. It is an experience that is hard to describe to someone who has never done it. The air is so thick with heat and dust that you can literally feel it in your throat. You watch people standing there in their pristine business suits, slowly dissolving into puddles of sweat, clutching their water bottles like their lives depend on it. Transport for London actually has to hand out free paper fans and post signs everywhere, warning people to carry water, because every single day during a heat wave, People literally faint on the trains. In the US, if a public transit system reached 95 degrees inside the passenger cabin, there would be lawsuits and national news coverage. In London, it is just called a Tuesday in July. If you decide to avoid the subway and take one of the iconic red double-decker buses, you do not get much of a reprieve. The top deck of a London bus in the summer is essentially a greenhouse on wheels. It is surrounded by giant glass windows, has very little ventilation, and is constantly idling in heavy city traffic, with the heat from the engine rising straight up into the passenger cabin. You sit up there, looking out at the beautiful historic streets of London, while your clothes slowly fuse to the plastic seat. This brings us to the fourth point, which is the absolutely chaotic, unhinged way that British people react when the sun finally does decide to make an appearance. Because the weather in the UK is notoriously grey, rainy, and depressing for most of the year, Brits have developed a highly unique relationship with the sun. In the US, we take sunny days for granted. If you live in California or Florida, a sunny day is just another day of the week. But in Britain, a sunny day is a precious, fleeting resource that must be exploited to the absolute maximum. The moment the temperature crosses 17 degrees Celsius, which is only about 62 degrees Fahrenheit, something wild happens to the British psyche. It is like a collective light switch is flipped across the entire country. Suddenly, men are walking down the high street with their shirts completely off. In Scotland, they literally call this the taps of weather. Pale, winter-starved skin is suddenly exposed to the elements without a single drop of sunscreen in sight. Within 3 hours, half the population of London looks like they have been boiled like lobsters. They do not care about the sunburn. They are just so incredibly happy to see the giant yellow ball in the sky that they are willing to sacrifice their skin to it. The pub gardens become absolute battlegrounds. In the US, we have bars with nice outdoor patios, but the British pub garden is a holy institution. By midday on a warm Friday, every single pub garden in the country is packed to absolute maximum capacity. People will literally stand shoulder to shoulder in the burning sun, holding pints of warm beer, completely ignoring the fact that they are sweating through their shirts. There is a frantic, joyful energy in the air because everyone knows deep down that this beautiful weather might only last for 48 hours before the grey rain returns. I remember walking through a park in North London on a random Tuesday afternoon when it hit 24 degrees. There were thousands of people lying on the grass. Some of them had brought entire disposable barbecues, and others were literally wearing full swimsuits on a patchy piece of grass next to a busy road. It was like the entire city had decided to go to the beach, but without the actual beach. Back in the US, we would look at a 65-degree day and think, okay, maybe I will take a light walk. In the UK, a 65-degree day is a green light to strip down to your underwear and drink 6 pints of cider before sunset. If you are really loving me and my content and want to help this channel grow, please show some love by hyping this video up. Hit that like button, drop a comment below, sharing your own wild summer experiences, and share this with your friends who think 80 degrees is a mild day. Your support means the absolute world to me, and it really helps the channel break through the noise. Finally, we have to talk about the absolute pinnacle of British summer shock, which is the total, absolute lack of air conditioning in residential homes. This is the one thing that Americans simply cannot comprehend. When we tell our families back home that we do not have AC, they always look at us with pity and say, "Why do you not just go to Target and buy a window unit?" It sounds like such an incredibly simple, logical solution, but in the UK, buying a window AC unit is practically impossible. First of all, our windows do not support them. As I mentioned earlier, British windows crank outward. They do not slide up and down. A standard American window. AC unit relies on the heavy sash of the window sliding down to lock the heavy metal box into place. If you try to put one of those units in a British window, it will literally just fall straight out the window and crash onto the pavement below. The only option you have is to buy a portable AC unit, which is a giant, noisy plastic box that sits on your floor and has a massive plastic hose that you have to somehow snake out of your open window. But even if you manage to buy one of these portable units, you run into the second major hurdle, which is the astronomical cost of electricity in the United Kingdom. Energy prices in Europe are significantly higher than they are in the US. Cranking a heavy, inefficient portable air conditioner for 12 hours a day in London can easily add hundreds of pounds to your monthly energy bill. For most average British households, running AC is not just a luxury, it is a financial disaster. And then there is the deeply ingrained cultural mindset. If you ask a British landlord or a local why they do not install AC, They will always give you the exact same answer. Why would we spend thousands of pounds on a cooling system when we only get hot weather for 3 or 4 days a year? Historically, they were absolutely right. In the past, a British summer consisted of maybe 1 or 2 weeks of warm weather, scattered across 3 months. It just did not make financial or practical sense to invest in infrastructure that would sit completely idle for 350 days of the year. But with global temperatures steadily rising, those 3 or 4 days are rapidly turning into 3 or 4 weeks of intense, sustained, humid heat waves. The infrastructure of the country is simply not built to handle this new reality. The train tracks literally buckle under the intense heat because they were laid down with steel that was engineered to operate in cool, damp conditions. The asphalt on the roads starts to melt. The schools have to close because the classrooms turn into saunas, and the healthcare system experiences a massive spike in admissions from elderly people struggling with heat exhaustion. It is a fascinating, slightly terrifying cultural clash that happens every single year. You have Americans looking across the ocean, completely detached from the physical reality of British architecture and geography, laughing at what looks like a minor temperature spike. And on the other side, you have millions of British people trapped inside historic brick ovens, breathing in 80% humidity, suffocating without AC, while trying to enjoy a pint of beer before the grey rain returns to save them. Moving here has completely changed how I think about weather, geography, and how we adapt to our environments. It made me realize that a temperature number is completely meaningless without the context of the world it is occurring in. So the next time you see a headline about a British heatwave and feel tempted to roll your eyes, just remember, they are not complaining about 77 degrees of beautiful breezy sunshine. They are fighting for their lives inside a giant clay oven with no AC, and frankly, we should probably send them some ice. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end of this crazy journey through the humid streets of London, you are the absolute best. Do not forget to check out the links below to support the channel, and I will see you in the next story.